With Tatchell. After more than 40 years of Indonesian occupation, the people of West Papua are still fighting for their independence. With me to discuss the ongoing battle against Indonesian imperialism of their country are Benny Wenda, the chair of DMAC, the Koteka Tribal Assembly. He's a leader of the West Papuan independence movement who now has exile and asylum in the United Kingdom. Maria Wenda, who's an independence activist from West Papua and a women's rights campaigner, and Richard Samuelson, the co-director of the Free West Papua Campaign in the UK. Benny, if I can come to you, I know that you have first-hand experience of the Indonesian occupation of your land. Do you want to tell me what happened to you in 1977?
Thank you very much. Yes, this is what happened is 1977 is that happened to myself. If you look at my leg now is broken. It's because Indonesia bombed in my village. At the time, my age about 5-6 years old, and then I saw myself how Indonesia bombed by hot jet. I don't know the hot jet made by Britain or Europe, but this is that happened in my village, and then we. A lot of people, thousands of people flew to the jungle. At the time, 100,000, but it's not 100,000 more than that because my family, there is no in the list. So that's why I find out, and I really, my sentiment will grow up. And then I grow up in 5 years in the jungle. That's my sentiment will grow up, and then I continue to carry with this struggle for trying to help my people in the West Papua.
In that attack on your village, which you say was by Hawk jet aircraft, which I think were made in Britain, probably, how many people were killed in your village?
At the time, I couldn't count because at the time I'm very young, so it's more, there is, Balim River become red because the blood of my people, and that, I don't know, but there's more than 100,000.
100,000 killed?
Yes.
In that particular raid, or over the series of months and years?
Over the years, like, you know, because of 5 years, it's how many people die because of the hunger and nutrition and in the bush. So including my grandma, my grandparents, and all my uncle, and that's all the dead.
Maria, I think around the same time, your family's village was also attacked by the Indonesians. Do you want to tell us what happened to your auntie?
Yes, that time Indonesia military, they came operation in my village, and then one of my auntie, Indonesia military, they came and trying to rape her. And rape her. Yeah. And then she tried to protect herself. And then Indonesia military came and they cut her breast off, take off, and they cut hand and pieces. And then, yeah, from there, my parents, they didn't tell me when I was young, and then they gave special name. And then that mentioned about when my auntie lost, and then my parents, because that time my father married. And then they got me, and then they lost my auntie, but then my face like my auntie, and then they gave my name.
Gave her name to you?
Yeah, to me, and then they gave name mean I'm come back.
Yeah.
They lost my auntie, but then they come back, something like that. Yeah. I'm come back.
Richard, can you give perhaps an overview? I mean, since what year did the Indonesians effectively annex and colonise the western half of New Guinea, West Papua?
Well, the Indonesians originally occupied West Papua in 1963, so it's well over 40 years now of occupation, and ever since then the killing, that's when the killing started.
I mean, how many people do we think have been killed altogether? We know that in East Timor, that, you know, roughly about a third of the population was killed by the Indonesian occupation. What sort of other figures in West Papua?
Well, it's incredibly difficult to put an exact figure on, because even now any independent observers are not allowed in. So, and obviously Indonesia has kept very quiet about the actual numbers killed. But the estimates are between 100,000 and up as far as 600,000. Mm. But it's certainly in the same scale as what happened in East Timor.
Mm. I think in the early 1970s that round about there were about 1 million people in the indigenous populations in neighbouring Papua New Guinea and West Papua, and that since then, what's the population now in the respective countries?
Well, the two parts, I mean, Papua New Guinea and West Papua are the two halves of the island of New Guinea, and having been roughly the same, as you said, in the early 70s, now in Papua New Guinea there are 6 million indigenous Melanesians, and on the other side in West Papua there's only 1.5 million. And so my question is to Indonesia is explain that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Benny, what's your feeling about the prospects for independence in the future? We know that since the end of the Suharto dictatorship, the elected governments have made all kinds of promises, and indeed, you know, some people say the repression isn't quite as bad as it once was, but you know, there doesn't seem to be any really substantive movement, because the Indonesians basically are refusing to have dialogue with the independence movement, the Free Papua movement, and other nationalist organisations. So what in your view are the prospects?
Yeah, it's one thing is what my struggle is. I want to West Papua need to be free, like the other people enjoy, like other brother and sister in Melanesia, because Britain gave the freedom for other brother and sister brother in Melanesia. So that's why one thing I want to see my people free. And at the moment very difficult, because Indonesia is not interest of the human beings in West Papua, but the interest of our resources. So that's why they just pretending like promote democracy in Indonesia, but actually not. Because if we look the Indonesia, this is too powerful they run this the country, because military and civil servant, two government they run in Indonesia. And they said, no, the civil servant running this Indonesia, but not. The Indonesia is two government, they run the country.
Yeah, so you're saying despite the formal end of military dictatorship, in reality, the military are the real power behind the so-called democratic government in Jakarta. And they're the ones that are really blocking independence or even any negotiations.
Negotiation. Even we try to, we're not talking about the independent but dialogue only just what happening in dialogue for with the people of West Papua, open dialogue. Even that's Indonesia. We came to Jakarta and okay, first you Papuan you have to sign, and then you sign for join Indonesia, then we can dialogue. How we could.
Do you want to perhaps, Maria, tell us a little bit about the notorious example of the two West Papuan nationalist activists who raised the West Papuan flag? Do you want to tell us what happened to them? For merely raising the independence flag, what happened to them?
What happened is about the Jusak and Philip Karma. So there is a 2004, they raised the flag, peacefully demonstrate. That's the 1st of December is West Papuan Independent Day. So there is a peaceful demonstration, like women and men, and they came together and peaceful demonstrate. But then they already get permission from the police. And then the police just came and they get the Jusak and Philip Karma, and then when they catch them, and then they beat them, and then they put them in the car, and then they took them to jail, and then.
How many years have they been sentenced to prison for?
It's for 15 and 10 years and 15 years.
10 and 15 years,
Yeah.
for simply raising the
Yeah.
West Papuan flag.
But this is just only raise the flag.
Yeah,
But-
I'm right that they've been adopted as prisoners of conscience by Amnesty International?
Yeah, they concern. They recognize Amnesty International. They already recognize to prisoner to raise the flag.
I mean, Richard, how many political prisoners do we think the Indonesians have? How many West Papuan political prisoners? We know there's a lot of people are terrorized and harassed and victimized, beaten, killed. But in terms of those who are actually in prison,
The figure is, again, I mean, there are some who we don't know whether they're alive or dead. So the figure is roughly 1,000, and that includes Philip and Yusak, and others who've been in prison for over 20 years, and they're there because of their political opinion, which is that they want self-determination. They want to be able to choose their country's future. And really the question to Indonesia is, how can you claim to be a democracy when you put people in prison for their political beliefs and for just raising a flag?
I mean, you've pointed out the issue of the right of the West Papuan people to determine their own future. We know that one of the most shameful histories of the United Nations was its so-called sanctioning of Indonesia's so-called act of free choice, where the West Papuan people were supposed to be able to vote in a plebiscite to determine whether they should be part of Indonesia or be free. This was in 1969?
Yeah.
And what happened?
Well, I mean, this should be one of the best-known outrages of the last 40 years, as far as people's rights is concerned, and yet it's hardly known. What happened was, as you say, what was supposed to be a one-person, one-vote referendum for the Papuans to be able to choose independence or joining Indonesia, and instead Indonesia just handpicked just over 1,000 Papuans, put them into a concentration camp, and then forced them at gunpoint to vote for Indonesia. And not surprisingly, it was 100% vote for Indonesia, which of course, it was a complete sham. And ever since then, this has been the Papuans' main objective is to actually have a new referendum, which this time would be under proper United Nations protection.
But I suppose the West Papuans feel that what hope can they have in terms of believing the United Nations will protect them when the United Nations endorsed that phony plebiscite at gunpoint? The UN knew what happened, and they agreed and allowed that to go ahead and accepted the result. I mean, do you have any faith in the United Nations that they can actually take up this issue? Because they haven't done anything really in the last 4 decades, have they?
So that's why I always say that United Nations, they themselves, they break their own rule. So that's why what I'm asking is they must review what happened in 1969. Yeah, that's very...
Do you think they will, though? I mean,
this is my faith. Yeah. That's why I strongly believe that this is one country. It's just the United Nations break their own rule in West Papua. When I find out around the world, only it happened to West Papua.
I would say, as someone somewhat detached from the situation, looking at it, I would say it is probably one of the most shameful moments in the history of the United Nations. The fact that they allowed the Indonesians to force 1,000 hand-picked representatives at gunpoint to vote for incorporation into Indonesia, and then accepted that result as a legitimate expression of the West Papuan people. It's unbelievable that the UN could have ever allowed that. I mean, why do you think that happened?
It was under huge pressure from the big powers, particularly Britain, Australia and United States, who went out of their way to appease the Suharto dictatorship, and they did everything to quieten down any objections. So the UN is only as good as the countries that are in it. And at that stage, some of the African countries like Ghana, Senegal, tried to voice the objections, and the big powers weighed in and quietened it down. And so it was passed through.
I mean, you've raised the whole issue of the big powers. And you mentioned resources earlier. You also mentioned Hawk jets. I mean, Britain is arming the Indonesians, and weapons supplied by Britain have been used to repress the West Papuan people. Do you want to give us some examples of that?
Yeah, this is one thing what the people of Britain to help me, because one of the things is that British support democracy in Indonesia, but the other hand is support financially. It's like supply, arm and like hot jet and this kind of thing. So this is, I know that British people promote their human rights, but the other hand, the British government support Indonesia. Indonesia, they use all the water cannons and all these guns, and they use kill their own people, like also my people in West Papua. And this is, we need to, I need help, they stop.
I know, Richard, you've been doing some work on trying to stop Britain supplying arms to Indonesia for use against the West Papuans. Do you want to just give us a resume of some of the key weapons that Britain's been selling to the Indonesians, which have been used to repress the people there?
Well, the two ones that we've been focusing on are particularly the Hawk jets, which, in fact, just 2 weeks ago, there was a meeting in London between the British Foreign Secretary and the Indonesian Defence Minister, and with BAE Systems there as well. And what we've heard is that there's been another agreement to sell more Hawk jets, even though there's so many records of how Indonesia uses these weapons against civilians for internal repression.
There are also British-made tactical water cannon used against peaceful protesters in West Papua.
The
armoured cars.
That's right, made by Alvis in Coventry, and these water cannons have been used where they've actually added chemicals into the water as well, so that people whose only way of trying to get their voice heard is to demonstrate, because they're not allowed to have their own political parties or to use any sort of democratic process. And then these British weapons are used to stop these peaceful demonstrations. And the British government just says that Indonesia is allowed to control demonstrations, as if it's a normal situation, like it was happening in a country like Germany or Finland or something like that.
So our government is aiding the Indonesian repression of the West Papuan people in our name. It's authorising the sale of these weapons, and it's a Labour government doing it.
Yes, yes. And the other thing that they do, a Labour government, is to keep silent about the terrible human rights abuses. They try and quieten down anything when we get reports out, and we say, right now there are Indonesian military operations where there are thousands of Papuans who've been forced to flee into the jungle, and the British Foreign Office says, we've heard there's some trouble in the area, but the Indonesian authorities have told us that now things are calm, as if the Indonesians would tell the truth. They also say about Philip Karma and Yusak Bakagi, the two flag raisers, that the law in Indonesia is that you're not allowed to raise this flag, as if that's okay. So any talk of human rights, I'm afraid we take with a pinch of salt from the British government.
And Benny, perhaps can you tell us a little bit about British involvement in the exploitation of West Papua's resources? And it's a very, very resource-rich territory: oil, copper, Lots of fantastic resources there, and big British companies like BP and Rio Tinto Zinc are involved. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm worried about 20, 30 years' time when like Rio Tinto and BP now in West Papua, and indirectly or directly they are funding Indonesia to financially funding to kill my people. This is for, I'm talking about human being, but what about the nature? What about the wildlife? What about the other thing destroyed because of BP and Rio Tinto, Freeport gold mine? This is like, we Papuan is the earth is our mother. So in the UK or in Western world is like, you know, is shop like supermarket is they go to buy things, but we Papuan or we are we go to the to bush or something, we get everything what our mother provide, but now they destroy because of these things like Rio Tinto digging the very high big mountain. We call it the mountain also. This is secret. This is I'm worried. They're just looking for our resources, but what about the human being who are owner of these Papuan itself?
So you're basically saying that the franchises and the taxes that Rio Tinto and BP are paying is effectively helping to fund the repression of your own people.
Yes.
And they're destroying your sacred sites, and they're ripping the heart out of tribal areas, dislocating communities.
Yes.
It really is shocking. And again, why aren't we hearing more about this?
Yeah. What I'm asking is, please stop and then hear what West Papua asking. That's most important. Think about the human being first, and then think other things. That's very, very important.
Maria, can you perhaps tell us a little bit about some of the consequences of Indonesian occupation? I remember reading many years ago that Indonesia had a policy of forcing highland people from remote regions out of the highlands into the lowlands, ostensibly so they could be controlled, and the security apparatus of the Indonesian state could keep an eye on them and so on. But that a side effect of this was that the people from the highlands had no natural protection against malaria-bearing mosquitoes, and of course were dying in tens of thousands as a result of being forced to low-lying areas infested with mosquitoes. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and again the dislocation of the whole tribal economies?
Yeah. So in the city where Indonesia government said is no problem, there is no refugee and no refugee, but then in the village, because I grew up in the village, so there is more children and women and men. They're suffering in the jungle because no food, no medicine, and then Indonesian military, they operation in the villages, and they burn in the houses, and they burn in churches, and then they destroy the garden, and then animals, and then people scared, and then they're running away in the jungle. So there is no food, and then no medicine. So many children they're suffer, but many people they don't know. But Indonesia said, no, there is safe, no problem. But this is Indonesia, they lie.
Are there any Western or international aid agencies working in West Papua to try and help the people?
I don't think so, because Indonesian government, they stopped any journalists and any NGO going to West Papua because they worry if they allow them to interview or something, and then they're scared of what they're doing right now.
So basically it's a closed society which Indonesia keeps closed to stop the world finding out these terrible human rights abuses.
Until now they keep silent and hiding what they're doing now. But what West Papuan people and women need, UK and around the world and international, please see the people in West Papua. There is 1,000 of children and women and men, and they're suffering in the jungle, but nobody knows because Indonesia, they ban any journalists and any, even tourists, they didn't give a visa.
Yeah.
But they,
Richard, do you want to say a little bit more about some of the other sort of human rights abuses and issues which you think we should be aware of?
Well, I mean, just what Maria was saying in the sense that because it's so difficult for any outsider to get in to see whether it's journalists or human rights observers, or even the UN High Commissioner for Refugees was forbidden access last year. That it's so important that this message is sent out, and so for Maria and Benny to be able to speak out is one of the most important things, so that people can find out. But what would be ideal is for the people inside West Papua to have human rights of freedom of expression, freedom of to form political parties, so that they would be able to carry on their struggle peacefully, democratically, for independence, which is totally impossible now. If you do anything, if you open your mouth and say that you're supporting independence, then you're signing your own death warrant.
And there are effectively Indonesian death squads operating in West Papua.
Yes, and the West Papua is full of Indonesian intelligence officers who are just watching everybody, and then there's a huge amount of intimidation of old people or children whose maybe parents have spoken out about something. They pick on anybody. And yes, I mean, even one of the Papuan independence leaders just before Benny, called Koteka, he was killed in 2001 by the Indonesian Special Forces Kopassus, because he was starting to have an effect, and the message was getting out that the West Papuans want independence. They don't want to be part of Indonesia.
I mean, Benny, just to wind up, I mean, what do you want British people to do? Write to the members of Parliament? Write to the Foreign Secretary?
Yes, yes. I really need help. The British people please raise the issue. What happening in West Papua is human rights abuses, and lobby to our MP, local MP, write to a letter to Indonesia embassy, because Yusuf Pakag and Philip Karma only holding this flag, so that's very important. And other political prisoners, 20 years, 40 years in the prison until today still.
So we should try and get people to join Amnesty International's Prisoner of Conscience campaign, to write to the Indonesians to demand their freedom.
Yes, and then please invite me to give a talk, and also please write letter to Tony Blair or the British Foreign Minister. They have to help look at the situation in West Papua. Just don't follow the Indonesia, what the Indonesia said, but please hear what we are campaigning in here.
And what about writing to members of the European Parliament as well? Because that's a good forum to raise these issues, because the European Union has trading relations with Indonesia and can use that as a lever.
Yes, that's very
Okay, well, I want to thank you all for joining me today, exposing a horrendous, forgotten, hidden story of occupation and oppression against a people who are far away, but let's hope in the future not forgotten and are supported in their struggle for freedom. Thank you. Join me next week for Talking with Tatchell, when we'll be discussing another issue right up your street.